The grandfather clock in the Grand Victorian Hotel's lobby chimed midnight as Marcus adjusted his tie and settled behind the mahogany reception desk. 23 years he'd worked the night shift, and he'd seen everything: drunken businessmen, eloping couples, and the occasional celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi. But tonight felt different somehow, charged with an energy he couldn't quite place. The autumn rain hammered against the hotel's tall windows, creating rivulets that caught the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. Marcus sipped his coffee and reviewed the guest registry. Only 12 rooms occupied in the 200-room hotel, typical for a Tuesday in October. At 12:47 a.m., she walked in. Marcus looked up from his paperwork as the heavy front doors swung open. A woman entered, her dark coat dripping with rainwater, her auburn hair plastered to her shoulders. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a steady rhythm that seemed to echo through the cavernous lobby. What struck Marcus first wasn't her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful, but her eyes. They were a startling shade of green, intense and focused, as if she could see through walls and into souls. She approached the desk without hesitation, without the usual tourist's uncertainty or business traveler's impatience. "I need a room," she said. Her voice was soft, but carried an undertone of urgency that made Marcus straighten in his chair. "Of course, ma'am. How many nights? Just one?" Marcus's fingers moved automatically over the keyboard, but he found himself studying her face. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with high cheekbones and full lips that hadn't smiled once. Since entering, her coat was expensive, but not flashy, and she wore no jewelry except for a simple silver chain that disappeared beneath her collar. "Will you be paying by credit card? Cash?" She reached into her purse and pulled out crisp $100 bills, placing them on the counter with deliberate precision. "I'll need to see some identification for our records," she hesitated for. Just a moment, so briefly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Marcus had been reading people for decades. Something flickered behind those green eyes, a shadow of ... what? Fear. Determination. She handed him a driver's license. The name read Alina Vasquez, with an address in Portland. But when Marcus glanced at the photo, something nagged at him. The face was right, but the expression was different, softer somehow, younger. "Room 237, he said, handing her the keycard. "Second floor, end of the hall. The elevator is I know where it is." The response caught him off guard. How could she know? This was her first time at the Grand Victorian, wasn't it? But before he could ask, she was already walking toward the elevator, her wet footprints marking a trail across the polished marble. Marcus watched the elevator doors close, a strange uneasiness settling in his chest. Marcus finished his rounds at 3:30 a.m., locking the hotel's side entrance and heading to his small apartment above the corner bakery 6 blocks away. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the amber streetlights. His keys jingled as he climbed the narrow staircase, his mind still turning over the strange encounter with Alina Vasquez. He pushed open his apartment door and immediately knew something was wrong. The air felt different, warmer, carrying a faint trace of that expensive perfume he'd noticed at the hotel. Marcus's hand instinctively moved toward the light switch, but froze when he saw her silhouette against his living room window. Alina sat in his leather armchair, still wearing the same dark coat, though it had dried now. She faced the window, motionless as a statue, her auburn hair catching the dim light from the street below. She didn't turn when he entered, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. "What the hell are you doing in my apartment?" Marcus's voice came out rougher than intended, his heart hammering against his ribs. "How did you even get in here?" She remained silent, her gaze fixed on something beyond the glass. Marcus noticed his spare Keitha, one he kept hidden under the loose brick by the bakery's rear door, sitting on his coffee table. But how could she have known about that? He took a cautious step forward, his mind racing through possibilities. Was she a thief? A stalker? Someone from his past he'd forgotten? But nothing explained the calculated way she'd found him, the precision of her movements. "Alina," he said, using the name from her license, "I'm going to call the police if you don't start talking." Finally, she turned to look at him. Those green eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. There was something familiar about her face, something that tugged at memories he couldn't quite grasp. Without a word, Elena stood and began removing her coat. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if she'd rehearsed this moment countless times. The coat pooled at her feet, revealing a simple black dress that hugged her slender frame. "Stop," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "Whatever this is, whatever you think you're doing, just stop and talk to me." Him, reaching for the hem of her dress, Marcus turned away, his face flushing hot with confusion and fear. "I don't know what kind of game this is," he said to the wall, "but I'm not playing. You need to leave now." When he turned back, Elena had stopped undressing. She stood there in her black dress, studying him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Then slowly, she raised her hand and pressed it against her chest, right over her heart. The gesture was so simple, so human, that it caught Marcus completely off guard. For just a moment, her mask of determination slipped, and he saw something raw and broken underneath. "Please," she whispered, the first real emotion he'd heard in her voice. "Please remember." "Remember what?" Marcus wanted to ask, but the words died in his throat. Because suddenly, looking at her standing there in his dimly lit apartment, something deep in his memory began to stir like a photograph slowly developing in darkness, shapes emerging from shadows. Elena's whispered plea hung in the air between them like a bridge Marcus was afraid to cross. She stood motionless in his living room, her hand still pressed against her heart, waiting for something he couldn't give her recognition that remained frustratingly out of reach. "I don't understand," Marcus said softly, sinking onto his couch. "You keep acting like we know each other, but I swear I've never seen you before tonight." Elena's expression shifted, disappointment flickering across her features. She moved to his bookshelf, her fingers trailing along the spines until she found what she was looking for, a photo album Marcus hadn't opened in years. She pulled it out and sat beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the lingering scent of rain. With careful precision, Elena flipped through pages of Marcus's life. His graduation from hotel management school, photos from various jobs, birthday parties with friends who drifted away over the years. She stopped at a page near the back, her finger hovering over a newspaper clipping Marcus had almost forgotten he'd kept. The headline read, "Local Hero Saves 3 in Hotel Fire." Below it was a grainy photo of Marcus, 20 years younger, suit-streaked, and exhausted. Standing outside the burning Riverside Inn, the article described how he'd guided guests to safety, how he'd gone back multiple times to make sure no one was left behind. Elena's finger moved to the smaller text at the bottom of the article, to a line Marcus had tried for years to forget. One guest, Rosa Vasquez, 19, was pronounced dead at St. Mary's Hospital from smoke inhalation. The album slipped from Marcus's hands as the memory crashed over him like a physical blow. Rosa Vasquez, the girl in room 314 who'd been visiting the city for a job interview, the one he couldn't reach because the stairwell had collapsed, one who died while he was saving others. "Rosa," he breathed, looking at Elena with new understanding. "You're her sister?" Elena nodded, tears finally breaking free and rolling down her cheeks. She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph to young women, laughing at a carnival, cotton candy in their hands. The resemblance was unmistakable now that Marcus knew what to look for. Rosa had been the younger sister, the one with dreams of becoming a teacher. "She talked about you," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "After the fire, before she kept saying your name. She said you tried to come back for her. She said you held her hand in the ambulance." Marcus remembered now. The paramedics had let him ride with Rosa because she'd asked for him this. A stranger who'd tried to save her. She'd been conscious for those first few minutes, gripping his hand with surprising strength, telling him about her sister Elena who was studying abroad who didn't even know about the fire yet. "She made me promise to find Elena Vasquez," Marcus whispered. "To tell her that Rosa wasn't afraid at the end. That she talked about you. But when I tried to contact you afterward, your family had already moved. There was no forwarding address." Elena pulled off the silver chain around her neck, revealing a small locket. Inside was a tiny photo of Rosa, barely 18, full of hope and ambition. "I've been looking for you for 15 years, Alina said. I needed to see the man who held my sister's hand when she died. I needed to understand who you were." Marcus felt the weight of 15 years of guilt lifting slightly from his shoulders. All this time, he'd carried Rosa's death like a stone in his chest, believing he'd failed her completely. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save her." Alina shook her head, reaching out to touch his face gently. "You did save her. You saved her from dying alone." The silence that followed Elena's words felt sacred somehow, as if Rosa's spirit had finally found peace in this small apartment above a bakery. Marcus stared at the photograph of the two sisters, seeing Rosa's face clearly for the first time. In years not the pale, smoke-damaged victim from his nightmares, but the vibrant young woman Alina carried in her locket. "I became a firefighter because of her," Alina said quietly, tucking the locket back beneath her dress. "I thought if I could save other people, it might somehow balance the scales. I make her death mean something." Marcus looked at her with new respect. "That's why you knew about the hotel layout. You've studied building schematics, escape routes." Alina nodded. "I've fought fires in buildings just like the Grand Victorian. When I saw you tonight, when I realized who you were," she trailed off, struggling with emotions that had been building for 15 years. "How did you find me?" "I never stopped looking. Every few years I'd hire a private investigator, follow leads that went nowhere. Then, last month, one of my crew mentioned the Grand Victorian's night manager who'd been there forever, who'd worked at the Riverside Inn before it burned down. I drove here from Sacramento, not even sure if it was really you." Marcus remembered the intensity in her eyes when she'd first walked into the hotel. She'd been studying him, looking for the man who'd tried to save her sister. But why? Marcus gestured vaguely at her state of undress, the intimate way she'd entered his apartment, Elena's. Cheeks flushed red. "I practiced this moment for weeks. I had speeches planned, rational conversations about closure and forgiveness. But when I saw you tonight, when you handed me that key card with the same gentle expression Rosa described, I just feel close to someone who'd known her. Someone who'd been there when I couldn't be." She stood and walked to his window, looking out at the empty street. "I know how crazy this must seem. A stranger breaking into your home, acting like we were intimate. But for 15 years, you've been the closest thing to Rosa I had left. You were the last person to hear her voice, to hold her hand. In my mind, that made you family." Marcus joined her at the window, seeing his reflection overlaid with hers in the glass. They looked like ghosts haunting the same space, connected by tragedy and loss. "Rosa talked about you constantly that summer before she died," Alina continued. "She'd met someone, a hotel clerk in Portland, who'd helped her when her car broke down during a road trip. She said he was kind, that he'd made sure she got home safely. I think she had a crush on you." "I remember her," Marcus said softly. "She was stranded overnight when her transmission failed. I helped her find a mechanic, got her a discount on her room. She was so excited about her teaching interview. Didn't get the job, but she was going back to try again. That's why she was at the Riverside Inn that night." Lena's voice broke slightly. "If her car hadn't broken down, if you hadn't been kind to her, she never would have been there." Marcus felt the familiar stab of guilt, but Alina turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "Don't you dare blame yourself. Rosa went back because you gave her hope that good people existed in the world. You gave her courage to keep trying." The first pale light of dawn crept through Marcus's apartment windows as he and Alina sat together on his couch, the photo album between them. They'd spent hours sharing memories of Rosalina's stories of their childhood, Marcus's brief but meaningful encounters with her sister. The apartment felt different now, not invaded but blessed, as if Rosa had brought them together across 15 years of separation. "I have something for you," Alina said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small wrapped package, her hands trembling slightly as she offered it to him. "Rosa was carrying this when she died. The hospital gave it to our mother, who gave it to me." Marcus unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small wooden figurina, hotel manager in a tiny uniform, standing behind a miniature desk. It was clearly handmade, carved with loving attention to detail. "She made it for you," Elena explained. "She was going to give it to you when she came back to Portland. Our father taught us woodcarving when we were kids. Rosa always made gifts for people who were kind to her." Marcus cradled the figurine in his palms, overwhelmed by the gesture. All these years, he'd carried guilt for failing Rosa, never knowing she'd spent her last weeks creating something beautiful for him. "I can't accept this," he whispered. "You have to. It's yours." "It always was." Lena's voice was stronger now, more certain. "Rosa would want you to have it, and she'd want you to stop punishing yourself for surviving when she didn't." As the sunrise painted the apartment walls in shades of gold and amber, Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. The weight he'd carried since that terrible night began to lighten, not disappearing but transforming into something he could bear. A responsibility to honor Rosa's memory rather than a burden of guilt. "What happens now?" he asked. Lena smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face completely, revealing the warmth that had been hidden beneath her intensity. "Now I go back to Sacramento and stop haunting hotel registries," she said. "And you stop carrying guilt that was never yours to bear?" She paused, studying his face. "But maybe, maybe we stay in touch. I'd like to hear more stories about Rosa, and I think she'd like knowing we found each other." Marcus nodded, surprising himself by meaning it. "I'd like that." Lena stood and began gathering her things. The coat, the mysterious intensity, the desperate need that had driven her to break into his apartment, all of it was falling away, revealing someone Marcus thought he'd like to know under better circumstances. "Elena," he called as she reached the door. "Thank you for finding me, for telling me about the figurine, for helping me remember Rosa the right way." She turned back one last time, and in her green eyes, Marcus saw not the desperate stranger who'd haunted his hotel, but a woman who'd spent 15 years carrying her own guilt and had finally learned to set it down. "Take care of yourself, Marcus. Rosa would want that too." After she left, Marcus sat in his armchair holding the wooden figurine, watching the sun rise over a city that felt different now. Not haunted by the past, but blessed by the connections that survive even death. In a few hours he'd return to the Grand Victorian for another night shift. But he'd carry with him Rosa's gift and Elena's forgiveness, and the understanding that sometimes the people we try to save end up saving us instead. The grandfather clock in his apartment chimed 6 times, marking the end of a night that had changed everything, and the beginning of a day filled with unexpected peace.